Yake Wustini, Shawnegi, Anyet Kusani, Aktuasigu Gunischish. Welcome to the session on New Climate, and the title is New Climate, What Have You Observed? And I talked to the organizers who asked me to be the facilitator. Thank you to the organizers. To change it to New Climate, what are we observing? What are we observing? So that's the format here this afternoon. You guys are the expert panelists here. You didn't realize it, but you are, because it's what are we observing. So I want to quickly pass the microphone around and just have a discussion. This is the second time we've actually had this session. I remember because I was one of the ones who proposed it to the Clan Conference, sharing our knowledge last time. And so we had a session, some of you remember it. And this is a chance to now start developing the history, through each and every one of you who are here today. So I would like to pass the microphone to Kingiste, who I asked to come, and out of courtesy of him coming, let him at least start with some opening words, and then he can pass the microphone on, but at least give my elder a chance, and if he wants to defer till later, that's fine too.
Just going to say out the kaya, what can I you got on city yet? Well, in a neck of little has Gunhako can Sukaka was city. That's a weapon, Chishi Diahaka. My grandfather of the Sukaka clan, the Raven Sokai clan, said just saying thank you is the greatest speech a human being can make. And so that's basically all that I've said to all of you here. Thank you for coming. I personally believe this is a very, very, very significant topic and a very, very significant thing that we're going to do today. And I think it's important that it's done because the way things are happening with us on this earth, and it's not just Lincoln people, it's all people. Mm-hmm. It's pretty serious. It's not something real small. So I don't want to take any more time than anybody else can go ahead and start, because I think it's important that that happens that way.
Finish. And introduce yourself, just so they know who's talking. And they'll catch us, I think, all of us.
My name is Delilah, and I am from Wrangell, Alaska. And I guess the one thing that I notice, and I really didn't understand what the conference was about entirely until I came here and started hearing more about the climate and stuff, but I'm really glad I'm in this particular session, because I was just thinking just now, my daughter and I took my granddaughter and a few daycare kids out to SOK Rec last month, and we started noticing jellyfish all over the beach that were dead, and I didn't understand why. And so now I'm starting to understand all this stuff about the climate change and starting to grasp like what's going on, and the why are things happening. And I guess what I'm saying is I have a lot more interest in it now, and I didn't before. I didn't really care because I didn't really understand it. But now that I'm here, I understand a lot more, and I'm just really eager to learn a lot more about it. So, but we did see we couldn't understand why there were jellyfish all over the beach, dead. And we were just like, what's going on? And I was like, I don't know. But now I can actually go talk to her and tell her, that some of the stuff that I've learned here throughout the last couple of days. So.
Hi, everybody. My name is Kay McCarthy. The things that I started noticing were in about 1972. I moved here in 1965. So the first thing I really started noticing was all the hanging glaciers that used to exist around the mountains, and I have lived here most of my life in Alaska. But I have done a lot of other work in other parts of Alaska. So I noticed immediately these glaciers were just disappearing. I mean, they were melting. And they're totally gone now, but they were just getting smaller and smaller and smaller. The other things that I noticed was things like starlings, appearing here. Starlings are birds that were introduced into the United States, and now we have some big flocks of starlings, and birds migrate and all of that, but this was pretty significant to me. The other information that we all have, because it's available to everyone, we have very few king salmon coming back to the Chilkat. Big closures on the Stikine for kings and other species. We have windrows of krill appearing. I haven't seen these with my own eyes, but I know people who have on the beaches at Shishmaref. And then other work I've done in other parts of Alaska out on the YK Delta, the changes that I've really noticed over a period of years of going out there were tundra just being absorbed by first brush, dwarf birch and sort of the plants that you see that are kind of the smaller, they're not big trees or anything, but brush. And then more forested small groves of spruce appearing, and more rain in Juneau. And of course, last summer was really a kind of major summer for us, because not that we haven't had hot summers before, but last summer was an exceedingly hot summer. And those are things that I notice. I notice fewer birds of certain species. There were a big flock of kinglets in my backyard the other day, but I haven't seen big flocks of kinglets out on the wetlands trail, for example. And I've spent a great portion of my life working on the Tongass forest issues as a person who wants to see no more clear cutting in the Tongass. I think I'd like to see the Tongass protected to absorb, as a carbon sink, as a way of absorbing or capturing carbon, which it does. This is something we know about the Tongass, that it's a huge carbon capture, probably one of the largest left on the planet. So those are just a couple of things that I've noticed, and especially concerned about the forest and the sea, the state of our ocean.
Thank you. Hello, my name is James Leslie. I'm from Wrangell, Alaska. Quick glance around here, I would say my observation period is a little bit shorter than everyone else's. But my earliest memories was just the end of logging, and I suspect you've got a little bit more history behind that. But but in my limited experience, I have lived in Alaska my whole life. But in my short time here, I drive jet boats on the Stikine River, and just the entire dynamics of the river have shifted since I started when I was a kid. Historically, like when I was a kid, it would flood, and early June there would be snowpack, and there was channels that we'd use, and you'd be able to run it during the flood season. And for the last 20 years, my minimums for going through those channels has been getting, I needed more and more water, because we're no longer getting the floods that we used to get that would clear those channels out. So now places that I used to take boats when I was a kid, there's grass there. I can't get into, just straight can't get into places that I used to get into. The number of fish in the Clearwater streams that you could observe. I mean, I haven't done like a serious study on it, but the observations that I made in my lifetime based off fishing and tours, basically there was no king salmon left in 2 of the sloughs that we used to see 40, 50 pound king salmon in. Yeah, and there's a lot more whitefish, and I don't know what that's about, but when I was a kid there wasn't many whitefish, and now there's hundreds of whitefish up there in those systems. All the mountains look weird. I mean, they're just a lot of white, bare rock exposed. That's, at least definitely in my lifetime, and I suspect for most of everyone's lifetime, has always been covered in snow. Now, for the first time ever, it's having a chance to get algae and lichens growing on it. Shakes Glacier, the pictures of me as a little kid, and it's receded just about 1.5 miles in my lifetime, based off my radar. The dynamics of that's changing. For about 8 years, it was calving so hard you couldn't get in it, and when I was a kid, that was never a consideration. You could always drive right up through the ice, and there was periods of time we couldn't get boats past the ice flows that were choking off the lake. Yeah.
And I didn't mention the Mendenhall.
Oh, yeah. And I do bear viewing tours at Ann Bear Observatory. The number of fish has drastically decreased, and the average creek level has decreased. They are actually kind of monitoring a little bit down there. Forest Services, they take note of the river level. And the number of bears have decreased, and all of those, there's a million different factors that can contribute to that. But the general trend, at least from my experience, from my observation, is less bears, less fish. And a place that, historically had a lot of bears and a lot of fish.
So actually, hi, my name's Kevin Skeek. I'm from Juneau, live in Wrangell. Skeek. And what I've noticed, I've been in the tourism business off and on for 15 years, and I've watched the Mendenhall, for example, just completely shrink back. But I mean, as also, doing subsistence, I've noticed a change in how much fish there used to be when I was a kid, and then how much there is now. And the actual species of fish that were in there. When I was, for example, when I was in Juneau growing up and fishing in the fall time, there used to be a huge stockpile of dog salmon, chums that would go up. And I mean, they were everywhere. And there really wasn't too many pinks at that time. And then now it's like all you see is pink salmon going up there. And it's so rare that you see chums going in there. To touch on, the mountains now, I remember we used to look at the mountains when we weren't able to go swimming in the springtime, or until there was a certain amount of snow that was finally just showing on the rock of the mountain. That was kind of our own timeline calendar. Okay, yes, all right, the snow is right there. Now we could go ahead and jump in the water. But now it's like those packs are gone. I mean, the southeast, Alaska range. I mean, on the archipelago, it's just most of them don't even have snow year round anymore. Yeah, it is. It's pretty drastic. But I guess what I've observed is how to, and doing that and being in the tourism industry and having visitors come up here and having to talk about the climate change here and seeing it firsthand. I mean, you'll get all kinds of different people on both sides. Don't believe it. And then the ones that are, yes, I'm totally on board with you. And the opposition I have is like trying to convince them with all the facts that I have absorbed and learned, and try to go ahead and tell it to them, especially when that gentleman who did the talk on the glaciers in the northern, it was on, Richard. Yeah, Richard, yes. When he did that presentation with like Glacier Bay and how he showed the ebb and flow basically of how the climate was changing in that area. And then all of a sudden, in a very short period of time from when it advanced, like back in 1750, I believe the time was, and it had this very rapid, retreat. And, Glacier Bay is home to the fastest glacial retreat in recorded history. I mean, it goes back, 65 miles in just under 100 years. I mean, no glacier yet has done that we've recorded anywhere. And that's where I get a lot of opposition from people that always say, well, look, just 300 years ago, it's not because of the carbon in the atmosphere then that caused this big, huge, rapid retreat, and so then it's just like, okay, you got to kind of go ahead and slow them down and tell them basically, this is a different type of glacial retreat, because This has to deal with water temperature as opposed to what the composition of our atmosphere is. And what I've told them is that basically it's this hot tub effect, so they could absorb it, you know, because these people are definitely, I talk to the fence walkers, you know, the people that are completely on their side, I don't even want to waste my breath, you know, but these people, I have to go ahead and it's like, if they're on the fence, it's like, look, this glacial retreated dramatically backwards because it had this terminal moraine in front of it, had this layer of dirt, of insulation. And so when it pushed out and it dumped all that layer into the icy straits, very deep water, it was now exposed to salt water for the first time. Now this is different, and I call this like the hot tub effect. And what I mean by that is so I could help relate this to people is that, okay, the reason why I call this like, your body temperature is 98.6 degrees. Okay, you jump into a hot tub's like what, 104 degrees. You know what it feels like for 6 degrees change in temperature, right? Okay, well when that glacier pushed out and it dropped off, now it was exposed to salt water, and the temperature of that water, you might think, okay, it's like what, 48 degrees. Ice melts at 32 degrees, or freezes at 32 degrees Fahrenheit. And so the water temperature is like what, 48 degrees, maybe 52 degrees. So that is experiencing a huge dramatic change in temperature. And so you know what 6 degrees feels like. Imagine like 8 or 10 degrees difference. You know, you couldn't put your hand in that kind of water, you burn yourself. So what happens now is this started calving off dramatically all the way 65 miles to where it finally pulled its feet up out of the hot tub. And it's like, okay, I can sit right here. And then you add the, you know, the salt, you know, to ice, and so that's what happened. Then those people, you know, if you could go ahead and get some of them, it's just, it's a different type of change. And what's going on now with all the carbon that we're putting in the atmosphere, yeah, that's man-made. That's something that we're doing, and it's just hard to share that message. Did I just go on a tangent there? I'm sorry about that. I don't know. Yeah. But yeah, that's what I've witnessed, seen, and change in how to deal with people like not believing in it, and but yeah. Anybody else?
Well, Catherine Hayhoe called dismissive people. She didn't
What's that?
talk to dismissive. You were saying you won't talk to the fence walkers.
Oh yeah, people that are on the fence, you know,
Yeah.
they're like, okay, I'm still, I don't know, I need some evidence, but, and then you present them like with that fact that, you know, it's like, well, look at this. See, 300 years ago, you have the fastest glacial retreat in recorded history. I mean, the composition of our atmosphere at the time wasn't, you know, what it is today. So please explain that. You know, so those are the people that are on the fence that are like, oh, okay, now I completely understand what you're trying to say. You know, because that is like one of the facts that I get probably the most argument about is what is going on with our atmosphere and why back then was there this huge retreat, but then you're not seeing glaciers do that like right now, you know, so.
Well, she made I don't know if you heard her talks.
There you go.
If you went to her,
Oh.
either of her talks, did you go to either of her talks?
I don't know if I attended that.
Yeah, well, she just said that she just doesn't talk to people who are dismissive.
Oh, yeah.
She'll talk to the fence sitters, but she won't talk to the dismissive people.
Thank you for inviting me to attend your session. The thing that I have seen in my lifetime, and that's since 1948, living here in Juneau, has been really the kind of things that we seem to talk about so often are symptoms, not the real problem. And the symptoms are the kind of things that we're experiencing right now, and that's what we're talking about. Because the type of thing that I saw in this area here was self-centered, egotistical type of spirit that wanted to take all the resources that they possibly could, and they didn't give two hoots and a holler about what was happening with the earth. All the money you could make, all the type of things, we're still seeing that even today with respect to communities being flooded with tourism, with gray water, brown water being pumped into our areas. We used to fish out here and catch king salmon, and there was all kinds of herring in this area here. And it's really, really easy to talk about symptoms, and we can talk all about the statistics involved in that. But to me, the change that has happened is something that is interwoven in all of our culture. We can rationalize as to why we're doing what we're doing. And for me, I don't know about anybody else, it's easier for me to blame you than for me to take responsibility myself for what type of things that are happening. And I'm not against what you call economic development, but not at the cost of the earth and at the cost of our children. And we give so much away. I mean, right now, the state is giving more money to the oil industry than it has to its own people, and is taking more of the resources from the place. No salmon out here. There used to be salmon all over the place up over at Ock Bay. Just go out there and catch our salmon over there. We didn't have to go all the way to Thunder Bay or to run all the way out toward the ocean to catch our salmon. We can get our salmon here. And the list can just go on and on and on. The timber industry, the place is nothing but trees cut down all over the place. Yet scientists knew that trees help provide the kind of oxygen that Tlingit people knew that it provided oxygen. Yet when we Tlingit people mentioned that to them, the scientists came at us and said we didn't know anything, that we were less than, that we were not smart people. And yet our people could do that. When it comes to salmon, the same type of thing you mentioned salmon. The industry had traps that totally almost wiped out all of the salmon. The Tlingit people had their traps, and what I was reading of your work, Dan, and I agree with it, that they had a management way of handling the salmon so that it would not be destroyed.
Those little weirs in the streams and
Right.
salmon berries.
And so I don't want to go on and on because I could, but the point I want to make is it isn't until we get to the place where we realize ourselves the role that we may have in the kind of thing that is happening. Because I believe when we do that, we will be able to come up with the thoughts and the ideas on how we will be able to correct that which is wrong. Ituyeyati is the words that the elders would say to us. Ituyeyati. This isn't something new that we Native people have faced. We have faced these type of things. We were not here 10,000 years or more basically because we didn't know how to get along with the environment. We're here, my language is here, basically because the people knew that. And I personally believe that, my personal belief is that if we kept together and worked together, there's nothing we'd be able to restore and for the future generations of our people. So I'd be the first one to admit that it's easier for me to blame somebody than it is to take responsibility. Because it has to start here. I can't get it into your heart and your mind. You don't have to accept it. And that's really, in a way, none of my business. But the point of it is, what's in my heart is what is important to me. And so part of the reason why I show up in these type of things is just to be able to bring a voice from the elders who really, really knew about how we were all interwoven with each other in the environment. There's so much significant type of stories and accounts of how we learned about the ecology and the environment. So we're called Anyat Kusani, children of the earth. Children of the earth, we're to take care of the earth. We tell our kids, wash your face, take a bath, put on clean clothes, eat good food, and everything else, while we do the other type of things. So anyway, there's been a lot of change here. There was only 3,500, or I don't know how many million people came through Juneau here this last session. And the waters, the sound pollution alone, when those whales are jumping up, they're not jumping because they're in the SeaWorld program. They're jumping out of the water because if you were in the water and you heard all those propellers that were spinning at 5,000 RPMs, making a high-pitched sound, you would want to get out of the water. I don't care who you are, what language you speak. You hear that is loud noise. And I have a boat that can go up to 5,500 RPMs. So that's a real high whining note. And that's from paddling a canoe. And we designed our paddles so they wouldn't make any noise, because we knew the sound that the salmon people, we'd even apologize to them for going through their waters. So I can go on and on. So
Goodness, Chish. I'm Dinah Hobson. I live in Juneau, Alaska. I have family in Angoon, Huna, Cake, and Sitka, Excursion Inlet. And I've picked berries all my life. What I've noticed over the years, observed over the years with climate change in terms of picking berries, is some years we will not have berries like salmon berries or blueberries, or in patches of areas. Maybe we'll have blueberries on the Juneau side, but not on the Douglas side where there's more sun. And I've observed in Juneau and Douglas area where berry bushes off the side of the street will be chopped down and chemically treated so they won't grow, so we don't have access to berries because of chemical spraying and because of cutting. I've also observed and listened to my family in different villages and different communities where they don't have access to berries on private property that was traditionally Tlingit lands, and they're told that they cannot come on that property and pick the berries that they used to for their families and for parties. And berries are an important part of our culture. It's integrated into our lives, and it brings a lot of peace, and they're used at parties and family gatherings. Let's see, what else have I seen? Some years, well, several years, 3-4 years, there's no berries in Juneau and Douglas due to the sunshine. We've never had this much sun. I've never observed this much sun over the years. I mean, I like the sun, but the berries need rain and moisture to grow. And if we have continuous long months of sunshine, then the berries don't flower, and they don't ripen to maturity. They're green by the time fall comes, and they're not available. They don't fully mature. And berries ripen late, like salmon berries. I've always known salmon berries in the Juneau Douglas area to ripen in May, and June, July, August, they may get ripe, or they'll be ripe in certain patches in certain areas. In terms of bears, I've lived here a long time. I was away for a while. I was taken away at 8, but I came back in 1976. I've been here since 1976, and I've observed a lot of bears around where I live and around my car and on the street and by the garbage cans. And that's the effect of climate change and the lack of berries that are here. I have a lot of photos of bears every year now around my area. And when I open my door and I tell my kids, look first, to see if you see bears out there, because they're quite close. I like how Dave talked about gray water from the boats. To me, it needs to be a policy for tour boats not to dump their water in our precious, pristine waters. That does affect the environment here for our fish and for our berries. That needs a serious look at not dumping gray water from boats in our southeast waters. Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
Hi, everybody. When you were talking about the temperature freezing, I thought I'd throw in Celsius, but I missed it because I'm from Canada.
Oh, it's 0 degrees, yeah.
Yeah, 0. So I missed my opportunity there. But anyway, it took me a long time to get around to that. What?
What is your name?
My name is Ron Chambers, and I'm from the Yukon, but I also graduated in high school in Haines, Alaska. And I live in Haines Junction. So it gives me a Haines connection somewhere along the line. But I'm also part Quakati, and my grandmother's from, my mother's from Dai and Tlakwan area. So her father was a chief. Tlanot was his name, and he was there during the gold rush time, and he died during the gold rush. But anyway, to talk about the environment, I was a park warden in Kluane National Park, and that's the ranger for you guys. And we used to work with Wrangell St. Elias Rangers quite a bit at one time. And but anyway, what we did, we traveled the rivers, we traveled the mountains. I climbed Mount Logan back in 1975, which is the highest mountain in Canada, second highest North America. And speaking of climate change, some of the glaciers used to hike over aren't the same hike anymore they used to be. They have melted miles back. Literally miles back. And that is totally environmental change from my take of it, without the scientific side of it at all. It's what I've seen with my eyes. And in comparison, we've had other glaciers that have moved in the past. There's one called Steel Glacier up the Danju River in Kluane National Park. And about 40 years ago, it was called a Galloping Glacier. And it was moving along pretty fast, and so they gave it that name, because this is a huge valley of ice moving down a valley. The climate change question wasn't happening at that time. So when that glacier went down, it released and melted back somewhat. But the glaciers now aren't galloping. They're not going down and melting back. They're melting back. That's a big difference. And so to me, that's an observation, a physical observation, and that's over, well, I'm 76 now, and I've been there my whole life in that part of the country, and I've seen those changes, but the biggest changes that I've seen is the last 10, 20 years, last 10 years especially. So there's always been a change, but the changes are happening at a different pace and a different speed. And of course, to me, some of the changes is what we bring upon ourselves, like the fish and things like that. We put the pressure on the resources. But we're not only putting pressures on the resources because the numbers we're getting from them, we're changing their home, their spawning grounds, we're changing. So it's a double whammy. It's not the same, it's not just what you pull out of the ocean. They don't have the same home to go to anymore. That's even bigger concern, because if they don't have a place to go to, that's the end of the game. So we all need to take a second look at that, and it doesn't matter what our industry is or what our background is as to how we were raised. I mean, you know, people have fished for generations, but we've never fished with the insight in the fact that we've ever had to be concerned about them not ever getting back to their spawning grounds. And that concern is really there today. I say this because, like I said, I was a parkour, and I spent a lot of time traveling the country. That was my job, actually, was to go up valleys and climb mountains and take care of the country, the parks. The parks is just part of one entity. That's just one piece of it. Like the LSAC, for example, you know, it goes into Dry Bay and Yakutat. That's at the top waters. We're at the very top of it, us. And so we see the top end of what's going on. But I've also been on a transboundary agreement. I was a member of the Transboundary Commission that takes in the LSAC, the Stikine, the Fraser, and Columbia, and sat down. But it was always discussions about catch numbers. That was always the discussion. We rarely got into environment, almost because we don't want to hear it. There's some of that out there. We don't want to hear it. So if we don't want to hear it, don't bring it up. That's not responsibility. And I think, you know, that doesn't leave nothing for our children or grandchildren either, if we're really concerned. So I've been all involved in the Yukon River group as well from the Yukon side. We sit and meet with the people from Alaska. And one of the things which is really important to me as we're sitting here now, when we first started back in the late 70s, it was kind of them and us. It was Canada sitting down with the diplomats from the US, and they were diplomats. They were Canadian diplomats sitting down with American diplomats talking about the Yukon River. I don't know if some of the diplomats ever seen a salmon or in the thing, see? And that's where they first started. And then later on, we got more and more of the people from the river involved, and it was kind of them and us for a while. And the reason why I'm making a point is because I think we need to get around all that. And at first, from what I understood, the guys down the river where thousands and thousands of fish come up the river, at the lower end of the Yukon River, for example. You can use the same example down at the LSAC. But anyway, in my mind, from what I understood, those guys down there had these big fishing boats and caught thousands of fish and all that kind of stuff, and they're selling them. And this is what I understood from the upper river, hundreds of miles up. So being on the panel, Yukon River panel, I ended up traveling down to the far end, right down to the far ocean. And I went down to some of those villages down there. My boat's bigger than theirs. So then I had to make a mindset here change. I learned that you have to deal with the people who we're talking about, and and understand each other. And not only that, for example, I can get some moose, I can get some caribou. Not as much as I'd like, we still have to manage them, but I can get some of those. But the people down at the far end of the river, they're about 90% fish. They got boiled fish, fried fish, dried fish, everything in their house like that. Fish is part of our diet too, but not as dependent as them. So once I learned that, then what we started doing is we started to make a cultural connection. We went down and said, we're the people from Upper River. We will talk with you. We will promise you that we will do the best we can to take care of the spawning grounds and the things at the top end. And then in traditional period, the people at the lower end said, if you make a commitment like that, we will help to see that some fish will get through, more fish will get through for you. That was how it kind of broke. Before that, it was them and us, and who's going to get more, and it wasn't working. And culturally, we went down and did that. And that changed more minds than anything we ever did, tried diplomatically and all the rest of it. I have a regalia, headdress, and I do drums and sing, and I went down and talked to the students down the river. Didn't talk to them about fish numbers or anything like that. Talked to them as people of the river. That, to me, had more power than all the rest of the meetings we ever had collectively. And when we sat down with each other, we were talking together as a people, rather than having a river separating us. We used the river to bring us together. And to me, that's my message here now. And it took a while to describe that, but I've actually lived through it. And I did live in Haines. I graduated in high school in Haines, so I know something about the fishing there. And I got relatives in Haines, and I'm related to Katsik in Haines. There's Katsiks there. And so I'm a big believer in that, and this conference is doing that. And if I can't bring anything else to the conference, that's one thing I would like to bring. And maybe I'll make a plug. I'm on tomorrow morning too. So I haven't even fully decided what I'm going to do tomorrow. We're talking about the language thing, and the language is very much part of it, very much part of it. And so I just want to bring that out. Kunishish.
My name's Bob Fagan, and I live in Juneau. The changes that I've seen have been in the Herbert Glacier, which is a very popular hiking area and a popular area for exploration and backcountry travel. And it's been very dramatic how that one glacier that has been familiar to so many people has withdrawn. The lake at the base of the glacier is now mostly gravel banks and mud banks, and the glacier itself is becoming more and more of a hanging glacier, and there have been fossil forests that have become accessible for people to explore and to learn more about glacial history. The other thing that I've personally noticed, which is a normal part of post-glacial succession, is that beavers have been building dams and changing watersheds everywhere the glaciers have pulled back. And without the traditional ways of respecting and harvesting and managing beaver, there's been mostly just arguments from Caucasian people about what to do about the beaver. And I tried to follow those as best I could because beaver are wonderful animals to watch and to enjoy. And, you know, maybe some of you who have been involved in the beaver management problems can correct me on this if I'm wrong, but I don't ever remember a Tlingit perspective on beavers in a watershed being mentioned in all of these discussions that the watershed groups sponsored. And I didn't even realize that they were missing until you asked us to come and share our observations. And now I wonder if that wasn't just a symptom of general overlooking of what's, you know, sophisticated ecology, but not in the tradition of Western ecology. And, you know, Western ecology is a wonderful tradition, but it's not the only game in town. And I think for all of us that have really enjoyed learning about the science of ecology, the one thing that we never learned was that it wasn't the only ecological science, that there were others too that we should have been learning about at the same time.
I'll make a comment on what you were saying about the beavers. On the Tachishini River, I personally, and I'm not alone with it, but ever since when about over 100 and some years ago, there was some smallpox and whatnot went through there, and so the people moved out. But the beavers have moved in, and they have actually dammed off some of the salmon streams, and some of them in a big way. So again, we're aware of things, but we're not responding to what's happening in a variety of ways. So there is there's something else working against what we're trying to do, and we need to pay attention in the big picture overall. We can't be so selective as to be concerned about how cute the beaver are. And for example, the Parks Canada, their logo is the beaver. Well, to me, I got a bone to pick with them because they're blocking off all the salmon down the river. And one other point, there's, I don't know if you heard of the Clo-Klux map. And on the Clo-Klux map, in the 1890s he drew it, or his family drew it, shows two villages called Sticks Villages on the Tachishini. They are no longer there. They're beaver ponds. The whole villages are gone. So there's that happening, you see. So we have a climate situation going on, and we have a cultural situation going on because we're not harvesting. Those beaver would never have been there back when the villages were there. They would have been utilized as food and trim and things like that. And because of the market won't buy them, then the beavers are privileged. So, you know, there's a number of things happening, and we've got to pay attention.
David.
One of the major things that I have seen is really the assimilation of our people that basically has removed ourselves from the environment. When we say community, we're just thinking about human beings. In the Tlingit way, and I believe the indigenous way of the people a long time ago, was that we were all interwoven into the earth. And that what we do to ourselves, we will do to the earth. And that is a very significant type of thing, a change that I've seen. When was the last time you saw a native person go into the salmon stream area and say, "Cha'adaye chatna'u, cha'adaye chatna'u, ine likan na chawayan chakoch, cha'at chayijias," speaking to the salmon people and saying, "Pardon me for disturbing your home. I'm coming through your home." That was something that I saw as a child because I was in canoes, not in an airboat or a jet boat, in a canoe that was designed to navigate the streams, and special paddles that our people made so that we would not make noise in the water. Or when you went into the woods and you saw the trees that were there, you talked to the trees. When was the last time any one of us talked to the trees?
I talk to them all the time.
But our people talk to the trees. That's really changed because they thought of them, and the reason they did was trees have roots like we do. We have roots, and that even in Western society, the root system in Western society, you don't even have it. Our people went all the way down to the great-great-great-grandparents on both sides of the family right now. That's another thing that I've seen change in time. There are very few of us who can go down our lineage like the way our elders used to go. Look at Jesse Dalton's statement. It's one of the very few people who went and talked about all of her relatives on both sides of her family, the root system. And so to me, the type of thing that is going to happen, and it's starting at the school system right now. The people from the board came last night. They have a policy that's changing the school to teach. So we are teaching kindergarten and first grade students about salmon right now. And we're teaching them about the water, and we're teaching them about the tree people. We're teaching them about the value of the overall ecological balance that needs to be done, and that's a long-term type of thing, but it's something that I think needs to be looked at and needs to be really, really expanded, because we take our kids out all over the place into the different areas on the different types of berries and different types of things that we have, and we teach them about their values. So that, just want to finish and say that. I'm sorry. Did you want to say something?
Is there time? I know
Yeah,
we're over time.
let's have you, and then we'll end with Kevin maybe.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
goodness cheese.
Hoa.
Yeah.
My name is Brooke Leslie. James is my brother. I am both Haida and Tlingit. Unfortunately, I don't know a whole lot about my Haida ancestry. I do know more about my Tlingit. I was fortunate enough to be raised, well, not raised. I was raised by my parents, but I was raised by my grandparents. My grandpa had me all the time. I was born shortly after he had a heart attack, and so he spent a lot of time with me. It's also probably why I have terrible time management, because he had a lot of patience. And one of the things, and it's interesting what your comments were, because what I've been thinking about this whole time is along the same lines of what you were saying is the themes of the conference that you'll hear when regarding climate change will talk about a lot of the similar observations of a lack of snowpack, rivers not getting their floods, longer dry seasons, shorter rain seasons, longer rain seasons in some areas, snow in places in massive amounts that it wouldn't usually see, in other areas not getting the snow they used to see, changes in harvesting and in the foods that are available. And I was raised, so my grandfather did not have his language, but he was a Tlingit elder and he was a storyteller. And he practiced a subsistence way of life and grew up in a subsistence way of life. And so I, by default, spending all the time I did with him, grew up practicing a subsistence way of life. I would be stuck on a rock and picking berries, singing in the woods, and that was normal. And helping him process salmon. And all of these things I was learning were normal to me. And it never occurred to me that it was different. It never occurred to me that not everybody in Wrangell was learning this. And it never occurred to me until I was in high school, actually, when there were a lot of people my age that had a lack of knowledge of their culture or had no interest in it, really. It was almost as if they were a little bit ashamed to be Tlingit or Haida, or to be able to identify with being what Alaska Native meant beyond, and not to be offensive, but a lot of people said, like drunk Native, or how you get Indian drunk, because when you're in high school, a lot of people are experiencing and partying for the first time. So it comes up as a topic in young adults. And it never occurred to me why I knew these things and why didn't my peers know more about their culture, know more about their stories, why they just didn't have this innate interest in it. And then when I went to college and I met people from a wider variety of places, I went outside of Alaska, and I started asking about their families. It completely threw me that people didn't know I'm Tlingit, I'm Haida, I'm Scottish, I'm Irish, this is what my mom is, this is what my grandpa was, this is what my grandma was on that side. I didn't know how to say it in Tlingit or Haida, and I would say, what are you? And they would look at me and say, I wish I knew what I was. I'm like, what do you mean you don't know who you are? How do you not know? And today still shocks me at points. Like my spouse, my partner, I will say, like, we'll have conversations and I'll reference something. And he's like, I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? How do you not know this? You don't know what your grandfather was, or where he came from, or what his parents were, and how they got here? And what has occurred to me through this and through the discussion of how this relates to climate change is that humans and how the generations have changed. We used to be hunter-gatherers. And some of us, like me, I grew up with a lens of gathering and hunting and a subsistence focus. And I remember I had a teddy bear that had angel wings. It was an angel bear, and I was obsessed with it, and I wanted it really bad. And my grandpa ended up going back to the store and getting it, and I had the bear forever until I lost it, and it was traumatic. And I didn't have a lot of them, though. I didn't have endless stuffed animals. It was special because he got me that one bear. And the idea, I was raised more with the idea of sustainability and subsistence harvesting and practices than I was with the idea of consumerism. And the more that I have grown and the more that I am learning about and watching the way that the society works or the global economy works, my major was in business, is one of the things that has always turned me off is how focused it is on consumerism. Every year a new model comes out of a car or a phone, and I'm like, what's wrong with my model? Why can't you build this thing to last 10 years? Why can't you do upgrades? And the thing is we're not just polluting our planet with people, because our technologies are developing, technologies used to develop and able to help sustain our main survival. So we were at the Tlingit Xi'an talk earlier, and they developed that technology to be able to harvest food to feed themselves. Now we have phones, and my son wants one in 5th grade to play games. I'm like, the purpose of a phone is communication. And he wants one to play games. And I'm, don't you have an Xbox for that? And he, well, no, because I want a different thing. And the thing is that we have now generations globally of children that don't understand, like, we're almost misusing technology in a way that it is fueling the drastic negative impacts on our climate. And I don't understand how you can have a discussion about climate change without having a discussion about education and generations and the use of technologies. Is technology bad? No. Is innovation bad? No. Is learning bad? No. Asking questions is always a good thing. But in my son now is in 6th grade, and I was helping him study for a quiz that was teaching him just basic geography, asking about what a plateau is, what's climate, what's weather. But we don't even have a global acknowledgement of climate change. So there's no curriculum being taught in the school to these kids. And if you think about what so many kids are being taught, well, they have 2 parents that are working full-time jobs. They have to be concerned about their sports. They have to be concerned about their homework. Where are they going to go? What are they going to be when they grow up? Who are they going to date? And all the things they're going to do. And one of the things that they're not being taught, or often aren't being taught, is sustainability. And what is climate change? And what is stewardship of land? And unless that's being taught at home, because it's not currently being taught in the school system, no matter how many observations we make of the ice melting and the fires that are happening in the extreme heat, he doesn't have a freaking clue and has no way to tie those things together. And in Alaska, I think we have a very unique opportunity that the Native people, we're such a small state that we have a lot of networking, so that you might know somebody that's in the Senate or in the House of Representatives. You might know somebody that represents your local municipality, whereas if you were in Washington, you might not. So we have quite a strong voice here, and we also have a revitalization of our culture happening, where I couldn't learn Tlingit as a kid. My grandpa didn't know it, but now it's being taught in our Head Start in Wrangell. That was never a thing. And so, but not only that, we're also seeing the effects of the climate on a grand scale because it's happening so much faster here. And we are a focus of the world and the United States because we have such an abundance of our resources. And I would love to see more conversation about how we can utilize our unique advantages of who we are as a people, the voice that our state is acknowledging as far as on a legislative level of the Alaska Native people. We have a lot of privilege here in that regard today, and how we can utilize that and what we're observing of our client to have a louder voice in the education system, in the federal government, and in the global economy. And I would really like to participate and learn more about what we can do to have more of those conversations and implement change.
Goodness, geez.
Thank you. Hawa.
Thank you very
One
much.
thing would, how would we make a totemic story of that? We could use our culture to build a story, because that's what our culture is.
The question was, how could we basically tell news stories, you know, and totemic, you said.
I think using our culture to build this, what we're saying, in a variety of ways, would be something, would be really something.
Yeah, good. I think we're growing close to running out of time. One thing as a professor and talking about all these issues, and this actually gets through to the other side who don't believe in climate change. And I say there's one fundamental question each and every person can ask, and it gets to the root of just about everything we've said here today, and that is, when is enough enough? Mm-hmm. And each person can ask that question, and that's what I tell my students when we get to the end of the whole discussion. Politically, from a scientific standpoint, every way you want to look at this issue, It's when is enough enough? And think about that, because I think that's the fundamental question for each and every one of us. We don't have to be sanctimonious, we don't have to be self-righteous, but each one of us contemplate when is enough enough. And that is in the every Tlingit story, history, that's one of the values that's passed on. I want to give Kevin just a minute or so to close out, because he's been thinking about a lot of things, one of my old students, and has some great thoughts.
I want to touch two things. Like with how have I seen things change around here? I grew up like with the education that, did you guys ever get weekly readers? It was like a newspaper that, kids, okay. I got those when I was a kid, and I'm sitting there in Juneau, right? And I'm learning about the Amazon getting cut down, how this is a bad thing, and we're learning about smog in LA and these different issues, right? And that was kind of the first time I'm, being told, I'm like, wow, how can they keep doing this? This is bad. Meanwhile, I get out of school and I check out and I'm walking home and there's 2 log ships loading up logs in front of me. Our whole view shed is being completely cut down, but I'm taught that's okay. And that was different. That was like, no, we need this. We need to make this money, And so I'm being taught in 2 different ways that this is wrong over here. They shouldn't be doing that, but don't bother us for doing it over here. And then, so I've seen that, but that's, what started in the 70s, went all through the 80s into the 90s and slowed down in the early 2000s. Now here in this place in Alaska, I've watched us go from, basically deforestation all throughout Southeast Alaska, but logging isn't like that anymore. I don't even remember the last time I saw a log ship in Juneau, or any of the communities for that matter that did logging. So let's say we slowed down very dramatically with the deforestation that's taken over. Look at the fishing also. We don't fish like we used to in the 80s or even early on or back when there was fish wheels, but yet we're seeing a change now. And because we've regulated, we have IFQs that's regulated it. We don't fish like it was done in the past. We don't overfish it, but yet why are we seeing declining, numbers in the salmon, like having to go all the way out there and fish. And then yet it's like I was listening to, like, it's easy for me to blame somebody else. It really is, because if you look at it here in Alaska and these, in our numbers that we have here population-wise, there's no huge increase in the state's population. You look at like even Southeast Alaska, there's still, I don't know, 60, 70,000 people in Southeast Alaska. Hasn't really changed, fluctuated very much, but yet we're seeing all these changes made. And yet I believe us as a group, we've went from basically deforestation to ecotourism. And so yet we're bringing, that's what, I look at it like, but yet it's like the population here hasn't changed much, but we are seeing the effects of everybody on this planet right here so fast, so rapidly. So yes, I do sometimes feel like, man, can we just tell the other side of the world not to do this? Because the population here hasn't really changed too much, but yet we're seeing all the changes in it, and at a much more dramatic, rapid, pace. And so that's what I've seen growing up. The information going from when I was told, okay, don't do that over there, that's bad, because, learning about the Amazon getting cut down. Meanwhile, it's going on right in front of me, and I'm hearing the chainsaws, right after I get out of school still going on. And then that's okay, to now it's like, okay, we stopped that, we changed it, but still, even though we slowed down and corrected what we do in this area and how we regulate our natural resources, we're still seeing the whole world's effect, and it's just perpetual almost. So I don't know, I just went off on there, but yeah.
Some of that's called leadership. You have the leadership that has the ability to make the decisions. Without leadership, everybody gets to cut the forest. And I think that's,
Okay.
you have to affect the leadership.
Goodness, geez, effective leadership. We're going to end with David Katzik. I want to say Aktwasigu to all the panel participants. You guys were all panel participants. And let David end it for the day.
Thank you. Yeah, I forgot to introduce myself when I first started. My name is David Katzik. I'm Kinkies. I'm from Tlakwan, but I lived most of my life here in Juneau. The question that you asked, it was a really good question. You asked about stories regarding the environment. We have tons of stories of how self-centered behavior resulted in famines, and the list goes on, and the type of things that happened, and what had to happen in order for the things to be corrected. And those stories have the heart of everything all the way across. They don't change. They don't change. If you're greedy, you're greedy. If you were greedy 10,000 years ago, you're still going to be greedy now. The point of it is, though, they have stories in there. I was thinking about that one story, Shanakutla, Wujkaduha, and all the different stories that we have regarding, and the water story where somebody was hoarding all the water, then somebody was hoarding all the salmon, and the list goes on with that. And they're very, very significant type of thing. The major thing in there at the end, Raven took initiative. And that's the key to getting anything done. So thank you.
That is great.
Let's end there. Be like the raven and take initiative. Exactly. Iko Aikwan.